So some of you do know probably that the original impetus for the creation of the Freedom from Religion Foundation was its principal founder, Anne Nicole Gaylor's pioneering work to help overturn laws criminalizing abortion and contraception in Wisconsin, and she was also part of NARO Pro-Choice America. This was in the early 70s, late 60s. Anne felt that in working for women's rights, I fought a battle that would never end because the root cause of the denial of those rights was religion and its control over government. And that's why she switched from pure feminism to the free thought and state church advocacy. So of course, it's more than disheartening to see these hard-won reproductive rights in such extreme peril today. And that's why I'm delighted that we have Nancy Northup and the Center for Reproductive Rights serving as champions for reproductive freedom in the United States and abroad. Nancy Northup has served as president of this leading reproductive rights legal center, known as the Center for Reproductive Rights, since 2003. FFRF took immediate note of the Center for Reproductive Rights when it first formed in 1992, because we awarded its then president, the late Janet Benshoff, a Civil Liberties Heroine Award when she spoke at our annual convention that year, and we had the pleasure of meeting her. She died recently. We are grateful that since then, this center has grown in influence, and under Ms. Northup's leadership, it has game-changing litigation work that has transformed how reproductive rights are understood by courts, government, and human rights bodies, such as the United Nations. Nancy Northup has led the organization's exceptional growth, tripling its operating budget over the course of a decade, opening 4 overseas offices, conceiving and implementing its strategic focus on ensuring reproductive health and freedom as a fundamental human right, and establishing the center as an international source for litigation and innovation. And you're probably aware that the US Supreme Court accepted an abortion case out of Louisiana concerning a Louisiana law designed to close clinics and undermine access to abortion through unnecessary regulations. You may not be aware that this case is brought by the Center for Reproductive Rights. If you look at so many of the major court battles over abortion rights today, you will find the Center of Reproductive Rights defending those rights and cases. I think, to borrow from the grapes of wrath, wherever you find a fight to deny reproductive rights, you're going to find the Center for Reproductive Rights there. Nancy Northup has had a lifelong of working for legal rights and human rights. She was the founding director of the Democracy Program at the Brennan Center for Justice in New York, NYU School of Law. She was a prosecutor, a deputy chief of appeals in the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, a law clerk for the Honorable Alvin B. Rubin out of the U.S. Court of Appeals of the Fifth Circuit. She has taught human rights, constitutional law as an adjunct professor at NYU Law School and Columbia Law School, and she appears frequently in leading media and press, and that's where I saw her. I saw her being interviewed recently by Rachel Maddow, and I said, that's our person. She is a graduate of Brown University and Columbia Law School, and she was the Kent Scholar there and managing editor of the Columbia Law Review. So we are giving Nancy Northup this Forward Award. Forward was backwards. I'm going to hold it up forward. And the sculptor, some of you have met him at previous conventions, Zenas Fruticus, he updated the statue that is outside the Wisconsin State Capitol of Buying 4 Women, dating to 1893, that we had to save when our Republican governor wanted to put her in the basement. And it wasn't a perfect statue, so he took it and he made it something more contemporary, but it's got its roots in the whole concept of this statue and forward. And he was supposed to be here today, but unfortunately will not be here till tomorrow, so he can't help give this. But this is a work of art. There's only going to be 19 of them. It's very heavy. So we want to give this award to Nancy Northup, and also I want to tell you that we offered her the honorarium. She said, give it to my center. So very wonderful. So please come on up.
Well, thank you so much. It is such a pleasure to be here with all of you this afternoon. And thank you so much for the 2019 Forward Award. It's interesting, at the Center for Reproductive Rights, we always say, fight forward. So we're going to be very, very proud to have this. I was delighted and also a little amused when I was contacted about receiving the Forward Award from the Freedom from Religion Foundation. Delighted because I am a fierce advocate for the separation of state and church. And I was amused because, well, truth be told, I'm a church lady. I have attended church all my life. It is where you will usually find me on a Sunday morning. I was born and raised a Unitarian Universalist. It was my mother who brought our family to the Unitarian Universalist faith. She grew up in a small town in the Naugatuck Valley of Connecticut, where my great-grandparents, let's hear it for the Naugatuck Valley, where my great-grandparents had immigrated from Sweden. And so she was brought up in a very strict Swedish Lutheran home. But she was always independent-minded. It's funny, the last presentation, growing up, my mother was always telling me the story of how under God got into the Pledge of Allegiance, how it wasn't there when she was a little girl, and she didn't think it belonged there when she was older. But she grew up independent-minded, and she was a free thinker. So she decided that despite her conservative upbringing during the Great Depression and World War II, that as an adult, she would find a religion that fit her free thinking. And so when I was born in Kokomo, Indiana, maybe not the hotbed of free thinking, she and my father decided to join the Unitarian Universalist Church. And I grew up all over the country. We moved around a lot. I was born in Indiana. I grew up in both Western New York, New York City, the heart of Texas, the Sacramento Valley of California, Connecticut, and wherever we went, the Unitarian Universalist Church was the one constant in our life because it was a place that we could go and find people who were willing to be open-minded and support each other on our spiritual paths. And we didn't all have to agree. And so when I got to college, I took freely to going to church, and I've just kept on going. I've been a Sunday school teacher, I've been president of my congregation, and even to this day, I am a deacon. So, what a surprise to be contacted with this award. But here's the thing, and Rachel was saying this morning or this afternoon about being Jewish, is that when you are in a minority religion, you are acutely aware of the critical importance of the separation of church and state. And Unitarian Universalists are definitely a minority religion. There are about 200,000 of us in the United States. We are vastly outnumbered by Catholics, Protestants, Jews, Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus, and yes, atheists and agnostics. So, as being part of a minority religion, I am, and also echoing what Rachel was saying this morning, just highly attuned to when the government is wielding its power of the state to promote a particular religious view. And nowhere, perhaps, is it more evidence that the government is wielding a particular religious view than in the area of sexual and reproductive health and rights. So it's not happenstance that I come to do this both as a church lady, but as someone passionate about the separation of church and state, and passionate about the ability of women to lead lives in equality and dignity. Because wherever you look, whether it's in the US or around the world, you can see this imposition of specific religious beliefs on public policy and law when it comes to sexuality, reproduction, gender, and the role of women. So thank you very much for this award, and thank you for the bedrock commitments to our Constitution that all of you have, to equality, to liberty, to freedom of conscience, and to the separation of state and church. And in accepting this award, I'm also deeply grateful to have the privilege I have of working with my colleagues at the Center for Reproductive Rights. It is our mission to promote reproductive rights as fundamental human rights that every government in the world must respect and protect and fulfill. So as you heard, we work both in the US but also around the world, in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia, and Europe, and at the UN. And we work on issues ranging from access to contraception, access to essential obstetrics care, to safe and legal abortion, and addressing gross violations like child marriage and forced sterilization. We bring strategic litigation in state and federal courts here in the United States, in national courts outside the United States, and at human rights bodies, both in regions and at the UN. And we build legal networks with partner organizations and with the private bar to ensure that there are a cadre of lawyers around the world working to ensure that every person has the dignity and right to decide about their reproductive health and lives. And I'm proud to say that in the last year, we had over 870 lawyers from 55 countries that were working with us to make sure that reproductive rights were advanced as fundamental human rights. And we're going to keep building that. So in a moment, I'm going to talk about the next big abortion rights showdown in the Supreme Court, which is before the court this term. But I want to first start us with some fundamentals. There is so much politics and partisanship around reproductive health that we forget that at the heart of the matter, there are some basic biological and medical facts. And I know this is a group that loves facts. And one note before I start, I am going to be using the terms women and men here to make my point, but my discussion should be understood that what women experience in pregnancy is also experienced by other people who are pregnant, be they trans or non-binary. Here's the first fact. Women and men have different reproductive systems, right? And here's the fact that's related to that, is that women risk their health and their lives to give birth and bring new life into this world, and men do not. For men, think about it, and again, we're always so busy talking about the politics, we don't get back to basics. For men to genetically contribute to the birth of a child, they need to contribute sperm. That's it. And I'm told it's not very painful. For women to contribute to the birth of a child, they need to contribute an egg, which may just be part of their monthly process, or if they're undergoing assisted reproduction, for example, in vitro fertilization, it may be a much more elaborate and painful process. Once a pregnancy is established, a woman then undergoes 9 months of first gestating an embryo, then a fetus, and eventually, hopefully, a full-term baby. And every step of those 9 months carries physiological, biological, and hormonal changes and risks to the woman's health and life. If all goes well and she carries that baby through all those health and life risks to term, she needs to deliver that baby either through the birthing process or through surgery and cesarean section. Both carry risks to women's life and health. Many things can go wrong: hemorrhage, infection, dangerously high blood pressure, obstructed delivery. Maternal deaths can happen during pregnancy and labor. They can happen during delivery. They can happen in the weeks following childbirth. Without access to prenatal and life-saving obstetrics care, women can and do die. And even with access, some maternal deaths will happen. That women die in pregnancy and childbirth has been true throughout history, and it's still true today. How high that risk is depends on access to health care and social determinants of health, like poverty. In Nigeria today, every woman still faces a lifetime risk of death of 1 in 21. So of every 21 women in Nigeria, 1 will die in connection with pregnancy. In Italy, that risk is 1 in 50,000. So think about that difference. There's nothing biologically different about women in Nigeria than women in Italy. What's different is their socioeconomic circumstance and their access to health care. In the US, as a side, you probably all know that we rank at the bottom of the developed world in terms of our maternal death rates. 1 in 3,000 is the risk of maternal deaths in the United States. So again, 1 in 50,000 in Italy, 1 in 3,000 in the United States. And those numbers are much worse for women of color. In New York City, where I live, African American women have 12 times the risk of maternal deaths as white women. So the bottom line, wherever you live, is that pregnancy carries risks to health and life. And that is one reason why contraception was so revolutionary for women. Without access to contraception, the average sexually active heterosexual woman would have about a dozen children. She would go through the pregnancy experience with those risks to health and life again and 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 again, which is why access to contraception is so fundamental to women's health and lives. It's why in the Affordable Care Act it was found to be a preventive, to be able to have access to contraception was preventive medicine, which is no copay under the Affordable Care Act, with the exception to the fact that there's lots of lawsuits going on about the religious objections to not providing contraception, but we don't have time to talk about that today. So not only is contraception essential, but so is the ability to access safe and legal abortion. Because in this country before Roe versus Wade and throughout the world today, where abortion is not legal and they don't have access, women will die. So those facts tell you that for people who can get pregnant, the ability to control one's fertility and make decisions once pregnant is necessary if our very right to life, if women's very right to life is to be respected. And of course, control of fertility is not just about life and health. It's also about our right to bodily autonomy, dignity, conscience, equality, non-discrimination, the right to be free from cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatment. And the Center for Reproductive Rights has won cases in human rights courts that the denial of abortion can be cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatment. And it's also about our ability to further our educations, participate fully in the economic, social, and political life of the nation. And it is for all these reasons that since 1973 here in the United States, and in nations around the world, and in human rights bodies, that courts find that reproductive rights are, in fact, critical human rights. And yet, as everyone knows, reproductive rights, and abortion rights in particular, remain a contested issue here in the United States. We are still fighting for access to safe and legal abortion. We are still fighting about whether employers can raise objections to including contraception in their health plans for their employees. We're still fighting about comprehensive, fact-based sex education in schools. And for heaven's sakes, we still hear in Washington today politicians objecting to having obstetrics care covered in basic health programs. In recent years, states have passed hundreds of restrictions on access to abortion. Now, most of these fly under the public radar, but this year, it was hard to have them escape notice. Alabama banned abortion altogether, criminalizing doctors with fines with imprisonment up to 99 years. Now, it's been enjoined. It is not enforced, and I always think it's important to remind people of that, because if you live in Alabama, we want you to know that clinics are open. Other states also banned abortion as early as 6 weeks in pregnancy. Georgia was an example that hit the news on that. Again, they've been enjoined. And these laws, while they've been blocked by the courts, and while they are clearly unconstitutional, what these states are trying to do is to get a test case back up to the US Supreme Court. Now, as you heard 2 weeks ago today, the court announced that they are taking an abortion case from the state of Louisiana. And before I tell you about that case, I'm going to take you back just 3 years. On June 27, 2016, the Center for Reproductive Rights won the most important abortion rights case in a generation. The name of that case, and it came from the state of Texas, was Whole Woman's Health versus Hellerstadt. And at issue in that case was whether, and we had been fighting these types of cases around the country, but this is the one that got to the court, whether states could pass unnecessary and unjustifiable and burdensome regulations on abortion clinics that masked as health and safety regulations, but were really underhanded attempts to close the clinics. And one such regulation in the Texas case would have required that every abortion provider have admitting privileges in a local hospital within 30 miles of the clinic. And that requirement was very effective in the state of Texas because it was almost impossible for doctors who provide abortions to get admitting privileges. The Supreme Court looked at the law. They found it had no basis in advancing any health reason, and it had a huge burden on women's access, and they declared it unconstitutional. Now, the Center for Reproductive Rights is before the Supreme Court on the exact same issue. Louisiana has a law that is identical to the law in Texas. Doctors must have admitting privileges within 30 miles of a local hospital. The name of this case is June Medical Services versus Gee. And I mean the law is identical. It's identical in language, it's identical in impact, it's identical in not having any medical basis. And in fact, during the pendency of this case, the state of Louisiana admitted that it was an identical law to Texas when they thought Texas was going to win in the Supreme Court. Louisiana lawmakers modeled their very law on the one in Texas after anti-abortion rights advocates saw the effect that the law in Texas was having closing clinics and advocated to their legislatures, let's do that here. Louisiana, with this law, is trying to sneak around the Constitution's guaranteed right to abortion by using an underhanded means to gut abortion access in the state. Louisiana's admitting privilege law was designed for one purpose, to shut down the clinics, so that no matter if Roe versus Wade stays on the books, there will be nowhere for women in Louisiana to go. And what was proved in the Texas case, and we proved it again in the Louisiana case, is that hospitals can deny admitting privileges to doctors who provide abortion care for any reason, for reasons related to ideological opposition, fear of backlash, or the fact that abortion providers don't admit patients very frequently to hospitals. As was the case in Texas, abortion access in Louisiana will be devastated if this law is allowed to go into effect. It was established at trial there would be one doctor in the state of Louisiana to provide care for the 1 million women of reproductive age. Low-income women, women of color, rural women will be the most impacted. The overwhelming majority of women who seek abortion care in Louisiana are low income, and 70% are women of color. The state of Louisiana is just flat out in open defiance of the Supreme Court's 2016 precedent. The facts, the law, the Constitution has not changed in the last 3 years. 2 justices of the Supreme Court have changed in the last 3 years, but a change in who sits on the Supreme Court should not mean a change to our constitutional rights. These admitting privileges laws do nothing to improve the health and safety of women who seek abortion care. Abortion is one of the most safe procedures that a person can have. It has a complication rate near 0. They remain medically unnecessary and create an undue burden. The Constitution demands that our fundamental rights cannot vary from state to state. A law declared unconstitutional in Texas has to be unconstitutional in neighboring Louisiana. So that's what's at stake in this case, and we need to be sure everybody knows about it. And that's where you come in. We need you to be talking about this case. We need the Roberts Court to know that people are aware that it's the same case, know that it can't be distinguished, and want to see that the Supreme Court is not going to be playing politics with our fundamental rights. One in 4 women in the United States will have an abortion. 7 in 10 Americans support Roe versus Wade and that abortion be safe and legal. We just need to make that support visible. There is so much stigma, harassment, and even violence around this issue that it can be hard sometimes to share one's own experience or to even share one's views. And I know that this group knows all about stigma, and I know that you are all about standing up to stigma and standing up and being clear about your values and clear about what you stand for and clear about what you believe. So together, we can build a nation where people are able to make decisions about their reproductive lives without coercion and discrimination, and with dignity, and with their own conscience at issue, not someone else's religion. Your partnership and collaboration in this effort are critical. So thank you for this award, and thank you for everything that you do. Do we have time for questions? Okay.
Hi, Rahul from New Jersey.
You know what? Now you have to tell us where in New Jersey.
Summit, New Jersey.
Summit, New Jersey.
40 minutes west by train from Manhattan.
Greetings from Montclair, New Jersey.
Hello. So, the 3 of 10 Americans who are anti-abortion rights activists or just anti-abortion rights, if abortion was just to be outright banned, contraception was to be outright banned, what is their fantasy of what would happen? What is an ideal America for them?
I never purport to speak for others. So what we do know is obviously what the devastation would be. And it's so important to remember the devastation is always going to fall on low-income women. I mean, before Roe versus Wade, women with means in this country were able to access abortion. They knew which doctors to go to who would do a safe abortion in the United States. They went to England, they went to Canada. You see around the world today, in Latin American countries where abortion is banned in every circumstance, there are plenty of abortions, and again, people with means can get access to safe abortion. So we know that the result of it would fall like a 10-ton bricks a pound, the poorest and the most unable to be able to address it. But you have to ask them the vision that they see.
Hi, I'm Mark from Madison, and I read an article recently. It was very disturbing. The writer was citing rapid increases in STDs in the country. And I suspect this is because the availability of health clinics for women is being taken away. And usually the most disadvantaged people without good health care. Do you have any figures on this, or are you tracking this phenomenon? Because, as we all know, STDs for a full-term birth can seriously damage a newborn. That's just one of the really bad consequences. But these are very disturbing. There's like 50% increase in the last year or two.
So I don't have those figures. I think places like the Guttmacher Institute, which has tremendously good research on reproductive health care issues both in the United States and abroad, probably does. And I'm sure that the combination of loss of clinics, and also, again, to get back to the importance of sex education. I mean, we're a very funny country about sex. And we're funny because on the one hand, it's everywhere because it drives advertising and so forth. And on the other hand, we have this, religious discussion that doesn't allow us to have full sex ed in the schools. And so, I think that's another factor that we should be looking at as well.
Cheryl from Portland, Oregon. What specifically can we do besides being out with people we know about the need for abortion rights and talk to people we know about this Supreme Court case? But is there any other specific way we could influence? Excellent
question, and absolutely. And I think it's with all advocacy that The reason I always start with like talk to someone you know is that it is amazing to me. Because of what I do, people tend to tell me things they haven't necessarily told others. And so I have had friends. I had a church friend who I'd known for a few decades, and we were out to lunch one day, and she'd raised about a young woman she knew who was pregnant, and she had said, well, I told her that she either had to give the child up for adoption or have an abortion. It's her particular view, and, because she was a young teenager. And I was surprised because I wasn't sure that she was, 20 years we've been talking, but wasn't really sure where she stood on abortion rights. And so, I said to her, oh, well, have you had an abortion? And she said, well, no. Oh, yes, she said, actually, yes, after I was married. And it was like her whole thinking was like, oh, wait, this is something that unmarried people do. Oh, no, actually, I did. And it was just stunning to me. And I had another sort of anecdote about this, just to talk about the power of the small, and then we'll get to the large. I have a group of friends who I've had dinner with for 3 decades since law school. We're all feminists. We all have been devoted to women's rights. And I made the comment a few years ago when the rate was 1 in 3 women had an abortion, that 1 in 3 women had an abortion, and some at the table said, oh, I don't think that's true. And 2 of the 5 said, oh, no, we have. So, and this is a group of feminists. So the power, and some of those, one of those actually later signed a lawyers who've had abortion brief that we filed in the Supreme Court. And it was the impetus for my thinking about, wow, if we just started giving people the power to actually combat stigma that way. So I always feel like, start local, start with your family, start with your friends, but then of course, do what we need you to do. Please support the Center for Reproductive Rights, support Planned Parenthood, support other organizations that are out there doing the fight. Do right to your, state representatives and your elected officials in Washington. You have a champion in Wisconsin. I know you're not all from Wisconsin, but Tammy Baldwin is she's one of the lead co-signers of the Women's Health Protection Act, which would be a fix if Roe were to be overturned. We need it anyways. It's to attack these kind of laws like Texas and Louisiana has. We are up to right now having 212 co-signers in the House, so we ought to be able to get a hearing and get it passed in the House this year. I mean, we need new congressional legislation to back up the Constitution, and so beginning to educate people and advocate around that. And the reason why I say make sure you also thank your pro-reproductive rights representatives at the state level and at the federal level. They often say when we go down to Washington, we don't hear from your people. We hear from the other side all the time. So don't underestimate the power of also saying thank you to your electeds for standing up.
Hi, I'm Cindy from Dubuque, Iowa, and I wonder if you've ever heard of a film called Ask for Jane?
I haven't seen it yet. Tell everybody about it.
It's an independent film telling the story of a group of young women in college who started an underground network to provide abortions to women in need. And they just call on this, anonymous phone and ask for Jane. And that Jane would give them an abortion provider. But their abortion providers kept getting arrested, thrown in jail, and this and that. So one of them, before he went to jail, taught them how to perform abortions on each other. And they did, and they never had any fatalities of the mothers. And this went on until Roe v. Wade was a year or 2 after that was passed. And I would recommend that film to anybody if you can find it. I would look on IMDb. Have you seen it? Oh, it's a book too, she tells me. Yeah. Ask for Jane. Ask for Jane. Yeah. Okay?
Great. Well, thank you very much for sharing that. And it does remind me of another thing that you can do, which is that because of the tragedy of the Hyde Amendment, which prohibits Medicaid to cover medically necessary abortions for women who are on Medicaid, and as I just went through, there are lots of medical and health issues that can come up during pregnancy. Many states, now some states, about 17 states cover Medicaid abortions in their state, from their state coffers, but Many states do not, and there are abortion funds around the country that raise money. You've got several here in Wisconsin that raise money to help pay for low-income women's abortions or pay for their travel and those things. And that is a very good way to get involved with other activists who are doing something very usually close to their communities, and helps build, I think, a really strong community around this. So also remember helping to support the funds and getting involved.
Hi, Nancy. I'm Pam, and I'm a local. My question is in regards to Cavanaugh. I've seen a little information, not a huge movement on impeach Cavanaugh. I don't know if there's any weight to that, or how fearful we should be of the power he might have. I feel like the media has at least me worried that. Whatever you feel comfortable commenting on regarding him.
So we are going to be looking to get 9 votes on the Supreme Court. We are going to be arguing before every single justice on the Supreme Court, so I don't want to characterize any of them. When we did take a position, the Center for Reproductive Rights for the first time in our history took a position opposing then Judge Cavanaugh's appointment to the Supreme Court, because we felt that he had a record on ruling on abortion rights issues and other reproductive rights issues that was not consistent with strong protections. But we are still going to be arguing to every single justice about why consistency with their opinion from 2016, that the very integrity of the court is on the line. And again, I think as you draw the public's attention to this, and as you advocate in the sort of atmosphere around which the Supreme Court will be deciding this, Chief Justice Roberts needs to know that the integrity of his court is on the line. For the court to change a ruling that is so clear-cut that there is absolutely no way to distinguish it within 3 years will undermine, at a time when we do not need more of our institutions of government undermined, the faith in the Supreme Court.
Thank you.
Oh, hello. I'm Kim Newton. I'm from Stanton, Virginia. I'm also a fellow UU and a facilitator for Our Whole Lives, which is a comprehensive sex ed curriculum offered by the UUA. I'm also executive director of Camp Quest. We're a national secular free-thinking camp network. And thank you. So sex education has been an increasingly important conversation in our camp communities. And it's also very important to me personally as a sex ed facilitator. And I wonder if you could speak to the work of the center around increasing sex education in schools, which you mentioned briefly earlier, but if you could share a little bit more, and how we can help encourage our local school boards to change their curriculums. Thank you.
Well, I think that, we have looked at and have not yet, during the Bush administration, the curriculum on abstinence only until heterosexual marriage programs that the federal government was funding with your money. We looked at ways that we wanted to try to sue on those because they are so sex discriminatory. Because these abstinence only programs, if you're just going to tell people don't have sexual intercourse and you won't get pregnant, that's not like a full semester worth. So, I spent time reading these programs, and they're unbelievable what they have to be built upon. And again, it is a very thinly veiled promotion of a religious view of the role of men and women in the family, that the husband is head of the house, that women need financial support. And they literally had slides in there that the teacher was supposed to bring in cold spaghetti and bring in frozen waffles, and you're going to talk about how girls' brains are like the cold spaghetti and the boys' brains are like waffles. And I mean, it's really something else. They have to teach a gender ideology, and they have to teach that about how that's going to make your heterosexual marriage, which you're going to wait for before having sex, as part of their programs. They're terrible and they fail. So I would say that, and we never were able to bring that lawsuit. We were trying to figure out plaintiffs, and the problems are in terms of causality, the kids probably weren't listening. So, how do you prove that, it was having an impact? But I think it's such a great issue for everybody to get involved in their own communities. There are lots of entry points to be able to be involved in reproductive rights issues, and I think the sex ed one is great because every single town Every single city, every single school board can make decisions around that. And even if your school board refuses to, you can start programs like the Our Whole Lives sex ed program that can be done in community centers and elsewhere. Because if our kids have healthy ideas about sexuality, if they have the facts that they need to know, and if they figure out their own standpoint, it's kind of like religion, right? Everyone has a right to come to their own standpoint about what they think about sexuality and the role it will have in their lives. It's like having your own standpoint about a religion. So I think it's actually a great issue for everybody to get educated on, and to and the SECUS, which is a sex education national organization, has resources on that. But it's a great thing to get involved in, and you might learn something.
Thank you so much.